And so we'll begin a new book tonight in preparation for the Bible Bowl. Very different than the book of 2 Corinthians, and we'll see that as we go. I want to begin with the title, the word Ecclesiastes. Let's see where that comes from. It actually comes from the first verse in the book. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. I'm not going to try to pronounce that Hebrew word. It's translated in the English language by the word preacher. It's a word that means the one who calls an assembly together with the purpose of addressing them. And so preacher is a good translation of that word in the Hebrew. The Hebrew Bible was translated into the Greek language in Alexandria, Egypt. And when they did that, they used, of course, the Greek word for that instead of the Hebrew. And it's a word very much like our word, Ecclesiastes. That word was not translated, but transliterated. In other words, it's the English pronunciation of the Greek word that translated the Hebrew word that's called the preacher. So in the King James Version, or at least the copy I have, the title of the book is Ecclesiastes, but in my Bible it says, or the preacher. That's what the name of the book is. And that's simply a translation of that word, Ecclesiastes. You might say the words of the Ecclesiastes or something. So it'd be a word like that. But that's what the word means. And so now that gives you some idea of what we're about to study when we study this book. The book of Ecclesiastes is a sermon. And it's a long sermon. There's 13 chapters to this sermon. I was talking to the class this morning about this book. I'm glad I lived at the time when some of the older preachers were still around that preached long sermons. Now you might think, oh, that'd be awful, have to listen to hour and a half, or 2.5 hour sermon. And you might think so, but these fellas knew how to do it. And as a young man, I was entranced with those preachers. And the reason a lot of preachers, I guess they tried that and they just weren't very good at it, and people got tired of long sermons. But the good preachers could really do that. And that's kind of what this book here, Ecclesiastes, is. Think of it as a long sermon. Now we're going to know who the preacher is. When we look at this, we learn that the preacher is the son of David, and he is king in Jerusalem. And then go down to verse 12 and we learn one more thing about him. He is king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now I want you to remember the history now of those kings. You remember David was king over Israel in Jerusalem, but now this is one of David's sons. And many of David's sons were king in Jerusalem, but there were only two that were king over Israel in Jerusalem, because in the days of Rehoboam, David's grandson, the nation divided, and all the kings from Rehoboam on were king over Judah in Jerusalem. But Solomon, and for a short time, Rehoboam was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And so that pretty much tells us who the author of Ecclesiastes is, who this preacher is. We're talking about Solomon here that preached this sermon. And as we look at the book, the context will tell us, and this is what we need to think as we think of this book. Solomon is preaching this sermon when he is an old man. In fact, if we look at this last chapter and he talks about all the infirmities of age, Solomon must have been pretty close to death when he gathered the people together and preached this sermon to them about what life is all about. So this might be called maybe Solomon's last sermon. And so as we read the book, keep in mind, we're reading the words of an old preacher. And I want you to notice who he is preaching to in this sermon. We find it in Ecclesiastes 11, verses 9, and then I'm going to go through chapter 12 and verse 1. And it says, "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth. And walk in the ways of thine heart and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh. For childhood and youth are vanity. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them." Those verses give us the context of Ecclesiastes. This old preacher is living in his evil days. It doesn't mean the wicked days. It just means this is hard years. Go down to the Webb House, and I've heard some of the older folks down there at the Webb House, and they'll tell you, they say, listen, old age is not for sissies. I mean, it gets tough in those last few years, doesn't it? And so they're living with the infirmities of their old age. And here these old people are, and here's this old preacher, and he remembers what it was like when he was young. I wish somebody had told me these things when I was young. I'm going to call the young people together. I want to talk to them before I die. I want to tell them what life is like and what life is about. And Solomon, for his love for young people, gathers the young people together and says, now listen, I'm going to tell you something. I've lived this, and I know what I'm talking about. And you, young man, in your youth, I want you to rejoice in that youth, but I want you to rejoice wisely. And remember, you're going to be held accountable for the things you do. And the evil days will come. I tell you, when you're young, there's so many things that you enjoy, you just have pleasure with. And you get old, and a lot of those things, you don't even care about them. I think about my great aunt who had her love for music. She loved music so much, she never even married. She was a piano teacher. And she was dedicated to music. And in her older last few years, she didn't care about music. She couldn't hear it anymore. She couldn't distinguish the notes, and it just sounded like noise. Well, that's what happens. All these worldly things that we think, oh, they are so wonderful. When you're young, keep it in perspective. Now, enjoy those things. But they're going to pass. And I tell you, life is going to be more than those things. And that's what this old preacher wants you to learn. Now, there's going to be some people read the book of Ecclesiastes sometime, and they say, oh, this is such a depressing book. And they'll read things and say, oh, that just sounds... You got to understand where the preacher is going with this. And so let's look at the conclusion. Once we see where we're going, we're going to understand what he's talking about on all these things. And some of it sounds kind of awful, but when you see where he's going with it, you're going to see what he's doing. So let's look at the end. The last two verses of the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Okay, he's wrapping his sermon up now. And here it is. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Now, young people, that's what you need to know. If you don't get anything else out of these 12 lessons we're going to have on Ecclesiastes, you need to get this. This is not a memory verse in the Bible Bowl, but make this your memory verse. Fear God and keep his commandments. And if you learn that, Solomon's going to do a good job preaching this sermon. And you're not going to be stared aside by all these things that will deceive you and thinking, oh, I'll be fulfilled in life with this or this and this. And Solomon tried all that and it didn't work out too good. He found out what the real purpose and meaning and joy and fulfillment of life is. And it's fear God and keep His commandments. Well, I am glad the young people in this area are going to be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. Sometimes the book of Ecclesiastes is saying, oh, that's a deep book. Oh, that's a difficult book. Let's put off studying that till we know some other things. But I want you to know something. God put this book right here in the Bible, and He put it there for young people. Solomon loved young people enough to preach this sermon. Well, the young people in this church here tonight, God loved you enough to make sure that sermon was preserved in His book. And He wants you to learn these things and know these things so you'll know how to live that full, wonderful, happy life. And so that's where we're going to be going with the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, to understand where we're doing this and how this preacher does this in this sermon, you've got to understand some key ideas. And he brings these ideas to us right at the very first. I want you to understand vanity, and I want you to understand under the sun. What does that mean? Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? Now, what does vanity mean? Vanity means there's nothing to it. It is empty. It is not fulfilling. And so vanity, all is vanity. Now that sounds kind of depressing, doesn't it? Here the old man is standing up with all these eager young people. He says there's nothing out there. It's just all in vain. It's all useless. But look what he says at the end of this. Under the sun. Now you're going to read that expression several times in Ecclesiastes. And that's the key. If you keep in mind what under the sun means, then you're going to have a good understanding of this book, and you're going to know how to appreciate what this old preacher is doing. Now, you look up at the sun. You know, when the sun is out there in the daytime, and you steer your eyes and look toward the sun, that's all you can see. You cannot see what lies beyond the sun, can you? It's all blinded. Things under the sun are things of this earth, things of this life. Those things that fade and grow old and vanish away. That's the under the sun things, the earthly, fleshly, carnal, worldly things. Now, the expression is not used in Ecclesiastes beyond the sun. You don't find those words there. But you find the idea there. Because what Solomon is going to do, young people, he's going to do this. He's going to teach you not to put your heart in on things of this earth, but on things that are above. Think about things in terms of heaven. Include God in all your thoughts and all those things beyond the sun. That's the spiritual, eternal things. But for a lot of Solomon's life and for a lot of his sermon, he's going to take the under the sun perspective. And under the sun, things look one way. If you remove the sun and you look beyond the sun into the eternal spiritual things, you get a different idea. See, under the sun, all is vanity. It doesn't amount to anything. No matter what you do or how great you think you are and all, it's going to be unfulfilling. But spiritually, if you could go beyond the sun and then look back on this, everything has meaning. Everything has purpose. Everything is wonderful for its time and created for specific reasons. Now just remember that. Because so much of this sermon, he's taking the perspective, the under the sun perspective. A lot of time when we go beyond the sun and look back at this, look at it from a spiritual standpoint, we'll get an exact opposite message from what he is teaching. And so keep that in mind, and it'll be the key to unlock the glory of this book. Now, he starts off talking about cycles. And he's going to mention the earth and the sun and the winds and the waters. And he begins saying, one generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Solomon, as he's preaching this sermon, he's that old preacher of that generation that is passing away. He's not going to be around much longer. He looks at all the young people he's gathered together. This is the generation that comes. And you know, we see that. Just open your eyes and you see one generation passes and another comes. I mean, I look and, well, I was just in Missouri and I saw the beginning of a new generation with that little granddaughter that was born there. And now Daniel over in New Zealand, he's had my little, he's my nephew, so what's that, second, whatever he is, he's kin to me. That little boy over there. But did you know that in the short time I've been preaching at Rockliff, we've had the funeral for 5 of the members of this congregation. There's a generation passing. There's a generation that's coming right on and going to take their place. And they're going to walk the same fields and go up and down the same roads and see the same sights and climb the same mountains and suffer the same things and have the same trouble that we've had. The earth is going to stay here. But the generations pass. Now, the sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down and hasteneth to the place where he arose. The sun, now that's from the perspective of the earth. We say the sun rises. Now we know the earth is rotating and all, but we see the sun from our perspective. It rises in the sky and then it sets. Well, turn around. In a few hours, it's going to rise in the sky again and set. And it goes in this circle, doesn't it? You know, it's one of the sure things. We talk about, well, sure as the sun comes up in the morning, don't we? We've heard that expression. Well, the sun's going to do that. And the world comes to an end now, so the sun rises. Now, that cycle occurs, but that's not the only cycle. There's a cycle with the winds. In fact, it's interesting to me that the winds are driven by the sun. Did you know that? The sun comes up and heats the earth, and the air rises, and on the surface the winds come in to fill the place where the air has risen. And then it spreads back out, and then when the air falls and it pushes the winds back out. The winds are driven by the power of the sun. I learned that down in South Florida. You could go out on the beach and go out on the beach in the evening and the morning. Wind would be blowing the opposite direction. I can't remember now exactly what it is. I think it's in the mornings when the wind is coming off the sea. And then the evenings, the wind's blowing out to sea due to the differences in the temperatures and all that are going on there between the land and the sea. And so the wind goeth toward the south and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually. And the wind returneth again according to its circuits. And so we see that. The wind, it blows in a big circle. In fact, I've studied some of this and studying meteorology and such in my professional career, because we had to study all these things and the effects things were having on global weather and such. And there's the big circles of the wind going north and south and east and west, and they go in these circles around, and it's all driven by the sun. But let me tell you something, the sun and the wind drives the water. And it says here, all the rivers run to the sea, yet the sea is not full. The place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. That sun comes up in the morning and it shines out over the sea, and it lifts the waters from off the sea, and the winds carry those waters back up into the mountains where it falls, and the rivers run right back to the sea. And so the sea never fills. And there you have in this ancient book, well, what you'll study in school is the hydrologic cycle and the power that powers it and the wind that moves it. And the effects of it is the water filling the rivers and the rivers going to the sea. And under the sun, it looks like everything just goes around and around and around and around in an endless cycle, doesn't it? I tell you what, if you got beyond the sun and you could see what was going on, and it's not everything going in a circle. Things are moving toward a purpose. There's a beginning and there's going to be an end, and there's a plan that God has, and it's moving toward that plan. But you've got to understand God, and you've got to get beyond the sun to see that. If you take the under the sun perspective, it just looks like things are just going round and round and round and not getting anywhere, doesn't it? And so that's the difference, see, in how the perspective of this preacher in this book. Now he says this: all things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. I mean, there's just more to find out about this world than you'll ever be able to tell. And it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of work in living a life. And just like I told the young people this morning, you parents are going to appreciate that I told them this. Listen, you can either work at life, or life is going to work on you. Now, it's going to be a lot of work either way. But some people have a pretty good life, but let me tell you, they work at it. And they make their life good by their work. And a lot of people say, boy, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take it easy and just kind of drift along. And I tell you, life works hard on them. And so there's going to be a lot of work in life. You got to decide now, are you going to work to make life good, or are you going to let life work on you? So you need to work at living, don't you? He says, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That's how hard it is to achieve satisfaction from an under-the-sun perspective. You know, you go somewhere and you see some great sight and say, boy, I'm glad I saw that. And you go home and you're not satisfied. Now I want to go see this. The eye never gets tired of seeing things. And the ear, you never get tired of hearing things. You hear a good song, and now I want to hear another song. And I hear a good lesson, I wish I heard another lesson. And so you want to hear something else, and you never fill your ears up with hearing. You never fill your eyes up with seeing. And there's always that dissatisfaction is, I wish I had a little more. Wish I could see a little more. Wish I could hear a little more. And then he says, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. See, is there anything why that may be said, see, this is new? It hath already been of old time, which was before us. Now, I know now, I got a new cell phone here, and I hadn't even figured it all out yet. And my parents didn't have one of these. They had a phone that hung on the wall, and they could take the handle off, but they couldn't take pictures with it, you know. So this is kind of new, you know. That's not what this is talking about. There's new inventions and all, but I tell you, the basic problems that man face in life and the questions they have about life and the trying to figure out how to live life, that's all been done before. No one's going to come up with a new idea about living that hasn't already been tried and already been discarded. And sometimes you think, well, now, wait a minute, I've never heard this idea. Let's try this idea and do it this way. This will be new. And here's why you think it's new. It says right here, see, is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It had already been of old time, which was before. There's no remembrance of former things. Neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. Say, boy, we've never done it this way before. Well, that's just because you forgot how they used to do it, see? Someone's already tried that and saw how good that was, and somebody thought they had a better idea, and they went back to that. And now you're going to try this, and you're going to go through it, and I'll show once and for all this method. But you know, even if you do, the next generation comes along, going to forget you ever did that, and they'll want to try it all over again themselves, and they'll think it's a new idea. And so there's nothing new. So be leery when someone says, well, we've got a new idea that no one's ever done before. Remember this. Every way to try to live life has already been tried. And for the most part, discarded as a failure. The only thing that doesn't fail is fear God and keep His commandments. And so don't listen to all these human philosophies. Let's get back and listen to this preacher. Now here we go. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So now this fella, this preacher, he had some power. He had some prestige. He had some glory. He says, I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. And Solomon had wisdom. Remember how God had given him wisdom? So he's going to apply this wisdom to see, I'm going to figure out what life is all about. And then he says, this sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I mean, this will wear you out trying to figure this out. You try to figure out what life's all about. If you leave God out of it, it's a lot of hard work that leads to vanity. That's why it causes a sore travail. But who in their life doesn't sometimes try to figure out what life is all about? And so that's just part of us. Now you take a dog or a cow or a bird, they don't sit there and worry about these things, but the sons of men do. We want to know what the purpose and meaning in life is. So it says this, I've seen all the works that are done under the sun. So he had the ability to do it, and he tried all these different things. And his conclusion is, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Now, that word vexation of spirit can be called, translated, some of the other translations do this, it's chasing after the wind. Have you ever tried to chase the wind down? Go outside, sometime I've seen a paper get blown by the wind. I try to chase it down, and I've been able to catch it, but I hadn't been able to catch the wind itself. The wind blows out there sometimes. See if you can run it down and catch it. What if you did? What would you do if you caught it? Kind of like a dog chasing a car. What do they think they're going to do with it if they catch it, And so you go out and try to chase the wind down, and even if you caught it, you couldn't do anything with it. It's a useless activity, isn't it? And so also Solomon says, trying to figure out what life is all about, this is useless. You can't do it. Now remember, that's the under the sun perspective. Take God away from life, and you can't figure it out. All right. He said, that which is crooked cannot be made straight. And I would, if I wanted to just do a modern version translation where I didn't care if I really got the words right or all, I might say that, there are some things you just can't straighten out. I've heard of people talking about some problems in life and trying to fix it. It'd be like unscrambling eggs. I mean, you just can't do it. There's some things that they're so bent out of shape, you're never going to get this thing worked out. And he says this, that which is wanting cannot be numbered. That's those things lacking. And those things wanting, there's something missing there. And the missing pieces cannot be numbered. There's more missing pieces than there are pieces to all of this. Now, I commune with my own heart, saying, lo, I'm come to great estate. I got the money to do this. He says, I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. And that's true. God gave Solomon wisdom more than any king ever before him. And he says, yea, and my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. He tried a lot of things. If anybody could ever figure this out, I'm going to be able to do it. But he says this, I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceive this also as chasing the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. It's like, think about what it would be if you're back in a cave and the entrance caves in and you're blocked. You're in a cave now. Well, now that's kind of bad, isn't it? But you look around, there's all these passageways. So, okay, I'll figure this out. We'll take one of these passageways and we'll see if we can't get out of here. So you try one, and now you know that one doesn't work. So you come back, I'm going to try another one, well, that one doesn't work. And so you try, and the more you try, the more your spirits drop, doesn't it? And you try to figure out life and you leave God out of it, and you might think you're pretty smart for a while. I'm going to do this. But the more you learn, the more sorrowful you will become, because you're going to try all these things and you're going to find they're all lacking. They're all wanting, and they're not going to get you anywhere. Well, under the sun, remember, if we could go beyond the sun and look back on these same things, we'd know what to do. And so that's to fear God and keep His commandment apart. And life isn't so dreary as the old preacher is explaining it to be. He's just explaining the under the sun perspective. That's the first chapter. We got some memory work here. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There's no new thing under the sun. See, that's the under the sun perspective. Let me give you another perspective. Let me take you beyond the sun. Let's look at things from an eternal perspective, from God's idea. So there's one of the prophets said, behold, there's a new thing in the earth. A woman shall compass a man. A virgin shall conceive and bring forth a son. He will be God with us. And God will take on flesh and dwell among men and pay the price for our sin. And they will bury him, and 3 days later, something never been done before, he will rise from the dead, and he will ascend into heaven, and he will establish a new covenant with man, whereby we can hear and believe and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ and be free from our sin and spend an eternity with God in glory. Now that's new. That wasn't, it didn't exist in Solomon's day. If there was no God, it never would have happened. But the beyond the sun perspective gave us something new in the new covenant. You want to know what life is all about? I can tell you that. Here's what life is all about. You hear and believe and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. And to obey that, you turn from your sins and you confess His name before men. And you're baptized into Christ and come up out of that water with a new life. And you live it in service of your Creator all your days. And someday, after the body's returned to dust and the spirit returns to God who gave it, you'll get a new glorious body that'll come forth from that grave, and you'll live in glory with Him forever. Now that's what life is about. And so we got this book. We're going to learn how the under the sun perspective doesn't get you anywhere. You look at things from God's view beyond the sun, and you're going to find out how you can live a life of fulfillment and joy and rejoicing. And so that's what we want to teach our young people. If you haven't obeyed the gospel, that's what you need to do. As we stand and sing, the invitation is given.